Corey Loftheim, supervisor of the Anthony Hay Cabinet Maker Shop here in Colonial, Williamsburg. I'd like to take the opportunity to share with you cutting a secret mitered dovetail. Instead of putting you to sleep over the course of 45 minutes, I've broken this down into steps like a cooking show so I can keep you with me here. And basically this is what we're looking at. And the idea is that when together, it's an invisible joint. So let's look at the layout of this. All these joints, when properly fit, you should have to drive together. It's most convenient when the members you're working with are of the same thickness. They don't necessarily have to be. And the thickness of one is transferred to the thickness of the other. And that's best done with a cutting gauge. Cutting gauge has a blade rather than a pin, so its intended function is to slice cleanly across the grain. So it's been set off the thickness of this piece to scribe across the grain here, and of course the thickness of this piece, so if they are of the same thickness it's a little more convenient. Scribe across this piece. You only want to run that one or two times. You keep on running it multiple times, you end up with a much coarser line. The advantage of a knife line is that I can work right to that knife line. It's very definite. And then we want to lay out the lip that ultimately will be mitered. And I prefer to use the same setting from the collar to the blade for both the thickness of the lip and the height of the lip. And I do that on both pieces. And the layout depends upon if you want a mitered shoulder on one or both sides. We're going to look at this with just a mitered shoulder on one side. So this would be ultimately the mitered shoulder. And as on a stage a little bit farther along, the pin, as in any dovetail, that's where I'll be cutting first, has the angle on the end grain, and the dovetail has the angle on the face. So I've gotten in the habit of laying out the pins first because in the Better English City work the pins are so small, so petite. One of the things you have to consider though when you're cutting out dovetails like this is to not lay out a pin narrower than your smallest chisel. And I think this will be apparent as we move further in the process. I've established that shoulder with nothing more than a saw. So again, laying out the pins. These are just approximations. The pins and the tails don't have to be uniform in width, but it is imperative that, again, that they be parallel in width. I like to saw, make all the angle cuts the same angle and then come back and make the other cuts on that angle. And as many times as I've done this, I still like to mark the material that will be wasted away. It's real easy to saw on the wrong side of the line. Since the shoulder will be at a diagonal, I'm not worried about cutting into the shoulder because that all gets mitered away. I oftentimes use my thumb to position the saw. When you have a lot of these things to do, after a while you don't even have to lay them out. You just have a good picture in your head as to exactly what you want, and you just lay it out with the saw. Some people like to use a pattern for this, but again, after a while, that's quite unnecessary. Sometimes on any of the dovetails, the workman will run his saw down another inch or so to try to get the blade as far to the interior of the cutout as possible. Most of the cutouts will be taken down to the square, but we're not going to take that expedient. And now it's just a matter of chopping out the waste. I want to hold my chisel off of that knife line. Let's see if we can get some good light in here. I want to hold my chisel off that knife line. Of course, the bevel side of the chisel tends to push it. And if I start right on the knife line, I'm going to be chiseling over and beyond the knife line. So initially I hold it just off the knife line, and then when I come back to clean it up, I take the last few cuts right on the knife line. So now it's just a matter of popping one chip after another. This is a place where you can get into trouble if you're too greedy. You can try taking too thick of a chop out of there, and you can actually blow out the corners. So usually at this point I go to a narrower chisel to take out less wood. So let's move on to the next step here. So I'm just going to continue this process of removing material till I get down to that lap, to that lip. on this piece here, you see that I've cleaned out to that square recess. If I have any surface area projecting above square here or in here, it's going to keep that dovetail from drawing in as it should. So I've just sawn and filed one of my cabinet scrapers to where I have a perfectly square corner here and here, so I can simply lay this in to determine, can you all see that things are square? And this edge is square to this edge as well, so I can make sure that I've cleaned out to that square. People wonder how we get dovetails to fit so tightly. One piece is the pattern for the other. So now it's just a matter of superimposing this over another. And that's basically what has already been done here. You need to hold, again, we call these the pins. You need to hold the pins right up to that knife line that I laid in with the cutting gauge. And I prefer to reach in with a bench knife and scribe off from the pins for the tails. And then I like to, well, my eyes are a little bit older now, so I usually put on my reading glasses, get closer to the window, sharpen the pencil up, and just define that knife line with the pencil. And then of course it's a matter of squaring it across. And there you do want to take care that line has been squared across carefully. So after sawing and chiseling out the waste in between the pins, that miter, and it doesn't have to be that carefully sawn. But that miter is then sawn with a dovetail saw, as you can see here. This now is my pattern for laying out the adjoining piece. And I like to butt this up against the stop so it's not as prone to move on me. And I really want to trace that off with a knife. As I've already done in this sample. I do like to reinforce those knife lines with the pencil. My eyes aren't as young as they used to be, so I just draw a sharp pencil along those knife lines. And now and then of course I've squared those knife lines across the end grain here. And now the part that takes a little bit of practice is learning how to saw right to the knife line, not shy of it, not over it. Time was money then too. So the less cleanup you have to do after these joints are sawn and chiseled, the more expedient and the more profitable your work is. So again, I'm sawing out where the pins will fit. So I'm sawing just to the waist side of the dovetails. And again, I like to position I don't worry about sawing into that lip. I just don't want to saw past the outer edge of it. dovetail should be an interference fit. Like really any of the woodworking joints, you should have to drive it together. We do glue these, but the glue in theory should only serve to immobilize what you've established mechanically with a nice tight joint. So now it's a matter of chopping out the waste. So I've chosen a chisel, right, that's not wider than the width of that cutout. And it's just a matter of, again, I want to stay off my knife line to avoid having the chisel push me across that. See what I mean about the limitation of laying out for small pins. These are not small pins by the English practice of the day, but I'm really at the limit for the narrowest of my chisels. Wouldn't start someone cutting dovetails with these. We'd start you with that full dovetail, the through dovetail. Then after you were comfortable with that, we graduate up to that half line dovetail that you oftentimes see holding the drawer front to the side. And though this is seldom used, I think it's a joint that a workman ought to have in his kit of skills, is being able to cut a secret mitered dovetail. So we're just going to continue this process until we get cleaned out to full square depth. Let's take a look at the next stage on this. The miter is running from this point to this point. I can use a miter gauge, or I can simply lay a straight edge on there. And you can see how that, because the lip is the same thickness here as its depth, you see how it meets right there at the diagonal. So again, I'll continue with taking out the waste. So here we have cleaned up the recesses to a nice square depth, right? Square both on this plane here, and obviously this was custom filed for this purpose, and also square on this plane. And I've gone ahead and roughly chiseled the miter. Some people use a plane. I use both, but you have to be very careful when you're running a small shoulder rabbet plane. You don't catch here and tear that out, so you have to come from both directions. On something this narrow, I just go ahead and use a chisel. And you can see that miter is still roughly sawn. Before I finish trimming the miter, I will put these two pieces together and see how they fit. So here the pins are cut, and here the tails are cut. And again, it needs to be a nice interference fit. And now I can see, holding the square up to this, make sure it's square. Now I can see exactly where I need to trim. Really demand that kind of fit. I prefer to use a slightly broader chisel for this, so I can just see visually that I'm not rocking that chisel. The softer the wood, the sharper the tool. And let's see how this fits with the other piece here. So just a little more fine tuning, and we're going to be there. We want that dovetail joint to be not only fit up tight on the outside, but to fit up tight on the inside corner. So a little more trimming. And this is the kind of wrestling that it should require to get these things apart. Now, years ago I was fitting the joint, and the process of getting one out from the other pigged myself in the eye. So how did I explain that black eye to my wife when I got home? I have another sample off the same set of pins that I had fit to this. And you can see why we call it a secret miter dovetail or a blind dovetail. Why do you conceal the dovetail? Aren't dovetails supposed to show? In the 18th century, dovetails were as common as mud. It would have been considered commonplace, provincial, for the dovetails to show on the exterior of a piece, though there are some exceptions to that. Thank you for the opportunity to share this unusual joint with you.
If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking with hand tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com, where you'll find free video tutorials, buying guides, workshop tours, and reviews. Make sure you subscribe to receive my regular blog posts and YouTube videos, and don't forget to check out my 10 steps for getting started. Enjoy!